Okay, great. All right, so good morning, everyone. You are here for today's session on culture in the classroom, and I'm very pleased to present our presenter for the session, Lauren Draus, who is an ELL adult educator at the Hamilton Fulton Montgomery BOCES. And Lauren, I will hand it over to you. Welcome, everyone.
Hi guys, hi everybody. Thanks for joining me. So I really would love for this to be a roundtable sort of discussion. I know when we used to go in person to our conferences in the past, that these were some of my favorite and most useful sort of sessions where we could hear from each other, other educators, other people in the field, and sort of get our ideas out together and sort of work through things. So I really want to encourage you to jump in, ask questions, give your comments, your opinions. I really want it to be interactive, which I know is not always the easiest thing for everyone, but be comfortable, you're safe, it's okay. So today we're going to talk about culture in the classroom. We want to talk mostly about how well do you know yourself, right? So let's get a little warm up started. And in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, tell us your full name. How are you involved with adult education? What generation are you? Are you a boomer, Gen X, millennial, Gen Z? If there is another one out there, please tell me. How do you listen to books or read books? Are they audiobooks? Do you do Kindle, electronic books, physical books? What is your zodiac sign? And what is your go-to emoji? If you happen to be on your phone, you can go ahead and put the actual emoji in there, but is it a laughing face, crying face, a heart, a thumbs up? You know, what is the emoji when you're texting you feel like this is the one I use? So if you don't mind, in the chat, tell us who you are, how are you involved with adult education, what generation are you, audiobooks, electronic or physical books, what's your zodiac sign, and what is your go-to emoji? And I'm going to play us a little audio music to get us in the mood. Awesome. Nice. Oh, I like seeing the emojis come on up. All right, born in the 80s, depends when, but that's typically millennial. After 84, you're going to be a millennial. Ooh, we got an Aries. Ooh, Sagittarius. Kissy face, I love it. I do the kissy face all the time too. I'm way too friendly. Awesome, another Aries, wow. Ooh, Pisces, nice. That's some old school physical books, I like it, I like it. Cool. Scorpio. I'm a Scorpio rising and I don't really know what that means. Pisces, another Gen Xer. Awesome. Virgo, oh, I bet you love to be organized. Cool. Well, I hope you guys have some fun reading everybody's responses in the chat. I love that everybody actually kind of knew their zodiac sign. Sometimes, you know, that doesn't happen. They're not always aware. But awesome. Thanks for sharing these things with us, guys. A little bit of getting to know you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Lauren Draus. I have taught ESL, ELL, ENL, and any of the other acronyms we want to use or change to. For the last 12 years at Hamilton, Fulton, Montgomery County, BOCES in upstate New York, we're right at the foothills of the Adirondacks. I was telling Berta, we are true upstaters, way in the middle. I am an elder millennial. I am at the older end of the millennial wave, but I'm still a millennial. I live for audiobooks. I love physical books too, but it takes me quite a long time to read a physical book. So I really, really enjoy an audiobook. I can get through at least one or two a month, and that makes me feel like, wow, I read so much. So that works for me. I am a Capricorn, and my go-to emoji is this laughing face. I never use the tears for some reason. I'm not laughing with joy all the time, but I'm always like, so I love that. So thanks for sharing, guys. Today, we're going to really talk about implicit bias. And this is a little bit of our agenda, and we're going to open up for discussion when we talk about these things. We're going to watch a couple of videos, get a better idea of what is implicit bias, how can we have awareness, implicit bias awareness, and sort of come up with ways that in our classroom or our organization, if we're in the administrative side of things, how can we have this awareness as we're crafting classroom policy, rules, interactions, lessons, and how that awareness might affect our students and affect ourselves even. So again, I really want to encourage you to jump in, ask questions, and give us your opinion and your ideas. So what is implicit bias? Implicit bias refers to unconscious attitudes, reactions, stereotypes, and categories that affect behavior and understanding. I think, a couple of years ago, we had the Black Lives Matter movement. We started to hear a lot about, these unconscious, unspoken biases that we all have. We talked about, white fragility. We talked about white privilege. And so this topic really came to the forefront. And my background is in anthropology. So I was really interested in these conversations and what does this mean for us, even as, members of our own community and society, but what does it also mean for us as educators in the classroom and the roles that we have there. So these are things that are unconscious, things that we don't think about and we're not doing actively. We're not aware that they're affecting us. And I have a great video. I thought we could take a chance and watch it. It's about 10 minutes long. But she does a really great job of describing this. So hold on one second. Can you guys hear it? Can you give me a thumbs up? Awesome.
I was born in a middle class family. My father was
Lauren, can you make it any louder?
That's his father. And by the time
Could you say that again, Lori?
Can you make it a little louder?
Absolutely, I can try to. Let's see if it has to do with my own audio.
I was born, he was already a businessman. But it didn't make a difference to him if his children is going to be a boy or a girl. They're going to go to school. So I guess I was the luckiest one. My mother had 16 pregnancies. From 16 pregnancy, 5 of us are alive. You can imagine, as a child, what I went through. Day to day, I watch women being carried to a graveyard, or watching children are going to a graveyard. At that time, when I finished my high school, I really wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor to help women and children. So I completed my education, but I wanted to go to the university. Unfortunately, in my country, there wasn't a dormitory for girls. So I was accepted in medical school, but I could not go there. So as a result, my father sent me to America. I came to America. I completed my education. While I was completing my education, my country was invaded by Russia. And do you know that the time I was completing my education, I didn't know what's going on with my family or with my country. There were months, years I didn't know about it. My family were in a refugee camp. So as soon as I completed my education, I brought my family to America. I wanted them to be safe. But where was my heart? My heart was in Afghanistan.
Okay, so I just want to pop back. So let's think about, and I don't know if I can stop sharing for a second. You guys see me? So let's just think about, as we're watching that video, what are some thoughts that pop to your mind about this video? Can you tell me about her? What are some things you're thinking about?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
A lot of difficulties to to carry on and live a successful life.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything else, anything about the way she looks, way you're hearing her? Go ahead, Lori.
Lauren, the thing that shocked me so much is out of 16 pregnancies, 5 surviving children, and viewing women and children, knowing they're dying and being buried daily.
Yeah.
And as far as her appearance, I just think of what I perceive to be oppressive in dress. And yet when I talk to women from other cultures, they don't always perceive it in the same way.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else? Anybody feel anything watching this? No. Okay.
It just kind of struck me how she was just very calm in her delivery of things that are obviously very emotional, and so I was feeling emotion in listening to her, but I did not, she was not presenting anything other than her words emotionally.
Yeah.
Lauren, there were 2 comments in the chat about just the difficulties as a woman in trying to get an education, and then the similarities to current students.
Okay. Great. Loss. Yeah. So there's a lot of messaging, and there's a lot of messaging that we're hearing and we're interpreting. We have visual messages, we have audio messages, and we're also getting those messages through our own filters. So maybe as women, we might be feeling that like, wow, 16 pregnancies, there's something there that as a woman, you can understand the physicality of something like that. And you might be hearing that through her. There might be something that as an immigrant you're experiencing when you're watching her talk, that maybe someone else who's from the United States isn't catching on to. So there's some things that I love to hear, like what's standing out to you? What are you noticing? Because those things are coming through our own filters, right? And not everyone is hearing or seeing the same thing. So we have another clip I'd like to watch. And let's see, can you guys see my screen? Yes, okay. I hate that there's ads, so I'm really sorry. I wish I could get them to go away, but I can't.
It's okay.
Really cool. Someone who looks like me walks past you in the street. Do you think they're a mother, a refugee, or a victim of oppression? Or do you think they're a cardiologist, a barrister, or maybe your local politician? Do you look me up and down, wondering how hot I must get, or if my husband has forced me to wear this outfit? What if I wore my scarf like this? I can walk down the street in the exact same outfit, and what the world expects me and the way I'm treated depends on the arrangement of this piece of cloth. But this isn't going to be another monologue about the hijab, because Lord knows Muslim women are so much more than the piece of cloth they choose to wrap or not wrap their head in. This is about looking beyond your lines. What if I walked past you and later on you'd found out that actually
I was a race car engineer, and then I designed my own race car, and I ran my university's race team because it's true. What if I told you that I was actually trained as a boxer for 5 years? Because that's true too. Would it surprise you? Why? Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately that surprise and the behaviors associated with it are the product of something called unconscious bias or implicit prejudice. And that results in the ridiculously detrimental lack of diversity in our workforce, particularly in areas of influence. Hello, Australian Federal Cabinet. Let me just say from the outset, right? Unconscious bias is not the same as conscious discrimination. I'm not saying that in all of you there's a secret sexist or racist or just like lurking within waiting to get out. Right? That's not what I'm saying. We all have our biases. They're the filters through which we see the world around us, right? I'm not accusing anyone. Bias is not an accusation. Rather, it's something that has to be identified, acknowledged, and mitigated against. Bias can be about race, it can be about gender, it can also be about class, education, disability. The fact is we all have biases against what's different to our social groups. The thing is, if we're able to live in a world where the circumstances of your birth do not dictate your future, and where equal opportunity is ubiquitous and each and every one of us has a role to play in making sure unconscious bias does not determine our lives. There's this really famous experiment in the space of unconscious bias, and that's in the space of gender in the 1970s and 1980s. So orchestras back in the day made up mostly of dudes. There was up to only 5% female. And apparently that was because men played differently, presumably better. But in 1952, the Boston Symphony Orchestra started an experiment. They started blind auditions. So rather than face-to-face auditions, you would have to play behind a screen. Now, funnily enough, right, no immediate changes registered until they asked the auditioners to take their shoes off before they entered the room. Because the clickety-clack of the heels against the hardwood floors was enough to give the ladies away. Now, get this. The results of the audition showed that there was a 50% increased chance that women would progress past the preliminary stage, and it almost tripled their chances of getting in. What does that tell us? Well, unfortunately for the guys, men actually didn't play differently, but there was the perception that they did. And it was that bias that was determining their outcome. So what we're doing here is identifying and acknowledging that a bias exists. And look, we all do it, right? Let me give you an example. A son and his father are in a horrible car accident, right? The father dies on impact, and the son is severely injured is rushed to hospital. The surgeon looks at the son when they arrive, and it's like, what cannot be? Boy is my son. How can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, the surgeon is his mother. Now, hands up, and it's okay. The hands up if you officially assume the surgeon was a guy.
Anyone? Anyone assume the surgeon was a guy? Yeah.
Fortunately not.
Good for you, Lori.
There's evidence that unconscious bias exists, but we all just have to acknowledge that it's there and then look at ways that we can move past it so that we can look at solutions. Now, one of the interesting things around the space of unconscious bias is the topic of quotas, and this is something that's often brought up. And one of the criticisms is this idea of merit. Look, I don't want to be picked, because I'm a chick, right? I want to be picked because I have merit, because I'm the best person for the job. It's a sentiment that's pretty common among female engineers that I work with and that I know. And yeah, I get it, I've been there. But if the merit idea was true, why would identical resumes, in an experiment done in 2012 by Yale, identical resumes sent out for a lab technician, why would Jennifer be deemed less competent, be less likely to be offered the job, and be paid less than John's? The unconscious bias is there, but we just have to look at how we move past it. And, it's interesting. There's some research that talks about why this is the case, and it's called the merit paradox, right? And in organizations, and this is kind of ironic, in organizations that talk about merit being their primary value driver in terms of who they hire, they were more likely to hire dudes and more likely to pay the guys more, because apparently merit is a massive quality. But hey. All right, so you guys think you've got a good read on me, kind of think you know what's up. Can you imagine me running one of these? Can you imagine me walking and be like, hey boys, this is what's up, this is how it's done. Well, I'm glad you can. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my day job. And the cool thing about it is that it's pretty entertaining. Actually, in places like Malaysia, Muslim women on rigs isn't even comment worthy. There are that many of them. But it is entertaining. I remember when one of the guys, I was telling one of the guys, hey mate, look, I really want to learn how to surf, right? And he's like, Yasmin, I don't know how you can surf with all that gear you got on. And I don't know any women-only beaches. And then the guy came up with a brilliant idea. He was like, I know, you run that organization with Youth Without Borders, right? Why don't you start like a clothing line for like Muslim chicks and beaches? You can call it Youth Without Board Shorts. And I was like, thanks, guys. And then I remember another bloke telling me that I should eat all the yogurt I could, because that was the only culture I was going to get around there. Right? But the problem is, it's kind of true, because there's an intense lack of diversity in our workforce, particularly in places of influence. Now, in 2010, the Australian National University did an experiment where they sent out 4,000 identical applications, right, to entry-level jobs, essentially. To get the same number of interviews as someone with an Anglo-Saxon name, if you were Chinese, you had to send out 68% more applications. If you're Middle Eastern, Abdul Majid, you have to send out 64%. And if you're Italian, you're pretty lucky. You only have to send out 12% more. In places like Silicon Valley, it's not that much better, right? In Google, they put out some diversity results, and 61% white, 30% Asian, 9 a bunch of blacks, Hispanics, all that kind of thing. And the rest of the tech world is not that much better, and they've acknowledged it, but I'm not really sure what they're doing about it. And the thing is, it doesn't trickle up. In a study done by Green Park, who are a British senior exec supplier, they said that over half of the FTSE 100 companies don't have a non-white leader at their board level, executive or non-executive, and 2 out of every 3 don't have an executive who's from minority. And most of the minorities that are at that sort of level are non-executive board directors, so their influence isn't that great. But hey, look, I mean, I've told you a bunch of terrible things. You're like, oh my God, how bad is that? What can I do about it? Well, fortunately, we've identified that there's a lack of opportunity that's due to unconscious bias. But you might be sitting there thinking, well, I am brown. What's that got to do with me? Let me offer you a solution. And as I said before, we live in a world where we're looking for an ideal. And if we want to create a world where the circumstances of your birth don't matter, we all have to be part of the solution. And interestingly, the author of the lab resume experiment offered some sort of solution. She said the one thing that brought the successful women together, the one thing they had in common, was the fact that they had good mentors. So mentoring, we've all kind of heard that before. It's in the vernacular. Here's another challenge for you. I challenge each and every one of you to mentor someone different. Think about it, right? Everyone wants to mentor someone who kind of is familiar, who looks like us, who has shared experiences. If I see a Muslim chick who's got a bit of attitude, I'm like, what's up? We can hang out. Right? You walk into a room and there's someone who went to the same school, you play the same sports, there's a high chance that you're going to want to help that person out. But for the person in the group who has no shared experiences with you, it becomes extremely difficult to find that connection. So the idea of finding someone different to mentor, someone who doesn't come from the same background as you, whatever that background is, it's about opening doors for people who couldn't even get to the damn hallway. Because ladies and gentlemen, the world is not just. People are not born with equal opportunity. I was born in one of the poorest cities in the world, Khartoum. I was born brown, I was born female, and I was born Muslim in a world that is It's pretty suspicious for reasons I can't control. However, I also acknowledge the fact that I was born with privilege. I was born with amazing parents. I was given an education and had the blessing of migrating to Australia. But also, I've been blessed with amazing mentors who've opened doors for me that I didn't even know were there. A mentor who said to me, hey, your story is interesting. Let's write something about it so that I can share it with people. Mentors who said, I know you're all the things that don't belong on an Australian rig, but come on anyway. And here I am talking to you. And I'm not the only one. There's all sorts of people in my communities that I see have been helped out by mentors. A young Muslim man in Sydney who ended up using his mentor's help to start up a poetry slam in Bankstown. And now it's a huge thing. And he's able to change the lives of so many other young people. Or a lady here in Brisbane, an Afghani lady who's a refugee who could barely speak English when she came to Australia. Her mentors helped her become a doctor, and she took out Young Queensland here in 2008. She's an inspiration. This is so not smooth. This is me, right? But I'm also the woman in the red clothes, and I'm also the woman that was in the rebellion. Would you have chosen to mentor me if you'd seen me in one of those other versions of who I am? Because I'm that same person. We have to look past our unconscious bias. Find someone to mentor who's at the opposite end of your spectrum, because structural change takes time, and I don't have that level of patience. Okay, so if we're going to create a change, if we're going to create a world where we all have those kind of opportunities, then choose to open doors for people. Because you might think that diversity has nothing to do with you, but we are all part of the system and we can all be part of that solution. And if you don't know where to find someone different, go to the places you wouldn't usually go. If you enroll in private high school tutoring, go to your local state school, or maybe just drop into your local refugee tutoring center. Or perhaps you work in an office. Take out that new grad who looks totally out of place, because that was me, and open doors for them, not in a tokenistic way, because we're not victims, but show them the opportunities, because opening up your world will make you realize that you have access to doors they didn't even know existed, and you didn't even know they didn't have. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a problem in our community with lack of opportunity, especially due to unconscious bias, that each and every one of you has the potential to change that. And I know you've been given a lot of challenges today, but if you can take this one piece and think about it a little differently, because diversity is magic, right? And I encourage you to look past your initial perceptions, because I bet you're probably wrong. Thank you.
All right. So, what'd you guys think of Yasmin? There's a lot of information, I know, but what'd you guys think about her? Have you heard this kind of conversation before? Have you heard anything about implicit bias or unconscious bias?
I've heard some of the discussion, Laura, and what I really loved, and it makes you like do a check on yourself and your own perceptions over and over and over again, is when she took off her hijab. I think that's what it. And underneath was her uniform from working on an oil rig. You totally didn't expect that, and then I had to say to myself, but why, why wouldn't you expect that? So she brought up a lot of things that made me like go back and say, but why?
And here's the great thing about learning about implicit bias is that this isn't anything to be shameful about, right? So when we have shame, we feel like I'm a bad person. And when we have guilt, we feel like I did something wrong. And so a lot of times when we hear about, racism and sexism and, discrimination, we might have feelings of shame around it and say, I'm not doing those things, right? And that's true, is that consciously we're not, many of us are not. But the point being is that these are unconscious things. And so as you walk through the world as a woman, as a man, as an immigrant, as a US citizen, as an English speaker, as a non-native English speaker, as a musician, as not a musician, whatever the things that are part of your culture, you're filtering the world through those lenses. And that's not something you are innately able to control right away. But when you have the awareness that it's happening, all of a sudden you have a toolbox. And that toolbox can tell you, hey, I got to maybe stop and think about this. You know, why am I looking at her going, oh, she works on an oil rig? Like, who would have thought that, right? And it's like, well, probably the messaging that in, you know, my culture is that women don't work on things like that, right? Women are not working on oil rigs. They're not carpenters. They're not mechanics. You know, I don't have a lot of messaging in my life that made that be normal. So when I see something counter to it, it kind of takes me aback. I'm not sure about it. And then I realize, wow, I do have that bias, because when I think of a mechanic, I think of a man. When I think of somebody working on an oil rig, I think of a man. So seeing a Muslim woman, that also was like, oh, yeah. So that's really, you know, the great thing about implicit bias is that it's nothing to be shameful about. It's an opportunity. As she said, we all have this opportunity to learn and to grow. Anybody else? Any other thoughts from her video? I thought she was kind of funny. She was able to give a little humor.
Can I toss in one more thought, Lauren? That, you know, like a kind of a shame on me that I didn't think of her as being as more than one thing. And we all are. We all are more than one thing. But I didn't, that wasn't my first thought about her. And that's a good reminder.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Anybody else?
Lauren, I have difficulty when discussing politics with people who aren't like-minded with me in trying to explain what I think I've understood for many years, the lack of opportunity because of bias, and how that's woven into our culture. And so it's very hard when someone's just following someone because or thinks differently than me. How do you explain that? I mean, just as an example, in discussing critical race theory, why that is something that people, you know, are getting excited about when it's clearly, I have a hard time understanding it. What can you do about it?
Yeah, so a lot of times, you know, people are coming at things from different angles, right? So something like critical race theory came up. It was very popular in all social media and news outlets. It was a good soundbite, right? And critical race theory is actually like a law class, okay? It's a class that's taught in law school. But it got blown up, right? And people are sort of hearing sound bits and they're thinking, oh yeah, I know what that is. And, you know, but again, when you're having those conversations with somebody who may be, you know, of a different viewpoint than you, number one, you should check your own implicit bias. And you should say, you know, so why am I having this reaction, right, to this person? Where are our differences and where are our common grounds, right? Is this, you know, where am I coming from when I'm speaking about this? And be aware. It doesn't mean you're, you know, wrong or right. It just means that you have that little bit of awareness, and then you can maybe have a little bit of compassion as you enter the conversation to say, you know, I'm not trying to, you know, convince somebody, but I can see their point of view maybe and find some common grounds and have those sort of things. But also sometimes you have to realize that some people are not open to those conversations or not able or capable. They haven't maybe done this kind of work where they've heard these concepts, they've learned some tools. They may not be ready for that. But it doesn't mean you don't have to, you know, you don't have to go along with it either, you know, but you can certainly, I think when you start to have that awareness, it starts to change your approach with people, right? And you can say, you know, I'm having this reaction, they must be having this reaction for the same reason. Because very rarely do I find that anyone says to you, I'm a terrible person, I hate humans, I don't like women and minorities. You know, I have never, I mean, I know they're out there, but I have never for the most part found anyone, even on, you know, differing sides of a conversation, that come out and say that sort of thing. And yet you might be saying, oh my gosh, it's so obvious that you do. Right? And so we're seeing some of those bias and they may not be aware that they have them. So I think the first step, like Yasmin said, is just being aware and owning up to that and acknowledging it, and then mentoring someone different than you. So that's a great example, is that you know, we often want to mentor people that are like us, and we're kind of, you know, we're social creatures. We gravitate towards people. So if I'm a woman, I might want to mentor another woman. If I'm, you know, a white man, I might see another white man and think, oh, this is, you know, I can help you, right? I know your situation. But like she said, you know, there's doors that people are not aware of. There's opportunities, concepts that people just are not aware of. And so part of being a mentor is introducing those things. Yeah. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. Can we see presentation?
Not yet, just your home screen is up.
Ah, okay. I'm going to screen share. Sorry. Okay. So where is implicit bias? So it really is the water we swim in, right? So as we think about, you know, fish in the sea, do they know they're swimming in water? No. Do we think about breathing air? Not for the most part, right? So it's literally everywhere. It's something that's unconscious. It's things that have been brought to our attention via our family life, our culture, religion, advertisements, television, books, magazines, all the messaging that we're getting. It's all around us. And we're not aware that these messages are always entering ourselves and that, you know, it's affecting our thought process. So just a cool exercise. I want to just have you unmute yourselves, and I want you to just say the first thing you think about when I say one of these words, okay? So government. What's the first thing you think when you hear the word government?
Authority.
Bureaucracy.
Okay. What's the first thing you hear when I say corporation?
Money.
Money.
Organization.
When I say urban.
Street.
City.
Congestion.
Suburbs.
Nice.
Green.
White.
Grass.
Foreign.
Language,
Foreign.
other language.
Plain.
American.
Hamburgers.
White.
Powerful.
Great.
Falling apart.
Yeah. So these are just some of those first things that come to our mind, right? It's just part of our own bias. It's part of our own culture and the way that we're looking at these things. Doesn't mean that they're good or bad, doesn't mean that they're right or wrong, but just a little bit of an awareness exercise of like, yeah, we do have that. We hear a word and it triggers something in us, whether we think about it or not, right? Whether we're aware that that's happening to us. All right. So what does this look like for schools? What does this look like for education? Before we watch this video, it's a much shorter, quicker video. Any ideas about how we might be seeing implicit bias, how it might have formed some of our educational policies or practices? Any ideas?
Expectations on children.
Expectations on children, love that.
The materials that are used, who's represented and how.
Yeah, Berta. Any other opinions? Thoughts?
I would say bringing students into a common education system.
So implicit bias, right? We all have it. And there's a chance that the people who created our systems, they probably had it too, right? I don't think just because it's a new concept or a new terminology we're hearing about right now, doesn't mean that it hasn't always existed, right? And it just was not necessarily spoken about. So as we're all part of systems, healthcare, government, school, you know, we can think about how did implicit bias maybe shape some of the policies, regulations, and then also the day-to-day interactions between, you know, staff and customers and students and how all of that plays out together. So I'm going to share this video and see how it's playing out in education. Hello.
Can you raise the volume?
Yeah, it's hard to hear, Lauren.
Oh. Sorry, I can't.
Lauren, if you can't raise the volume, can you maybe put closed caption on down at the bottom of the screen?
Thanks, Lori. Good idea. All right, sorry guys that was so low, but I hope that you were able to read the transcript. So what were some of your thoughts about that in education? Have you heard or seen any of that before? Maybe yes, maybe no.
I think certainly in our own program at a lower level, we certainly see that. But just the region that we live in, also is ethnically homogeneous. That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
You know, where we have pockets of great diversity, if you look at the community college campus right next door to us, for many years it was predominantly white, reflecting the communities here. I think they've done an awesome job of serving different communities in the last decade. But that has been that was my observation.
Yeah. So while there might be great diversity among the population, you know, as we saw in the video, let's think about the people in power, right? Let's think about who's on the school board, who is in administration, who is at the state policy level, you know, making decisions, right? So even though half the kids in Gabby's class were, you know, Latinx, the authors that were represented in the curriculum were white, largely. And why is that? Well, who's choosing the curriculum? Who's choosing those materials? Who's saying that those are the standards at which, you know, they need to be taught? And that's not coming from the population itself at large in that community. It's coming from those smaller groups of people who are in power, and they're choosing things based on their own experiences. So maybe, you know, I read this book when I was in school. I think it's a great book for students to read now. That's part of that implicit bias, right? So we see that. Has anybody experienced anything like that in some of the programs you may have seen or worked for, or that your children may have attended, or you may have known about in your community? Anything that sort of was like, geez, wow.
Well, in our program, Lauren, our instructors have had to kind of create different materials because for ESL programs, when you have like the kind of package material, the representation is not diverse. And even in terms of gender, you know, the doctor is male, and very much to the examples that were cited before. So we've had to kind of just change up, even at the most basic level, the images that are used, because those definitely reinforce stereotypes.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. That's a great example, Bertha. We've definitely done that too. And I think that's a great thing, because even though we're on the ground teaching, or we're on the ground, you know, working with students, the materials are coming from publishers, right? And I think for the most part, you know, yes, there's an awareness, and publishers are thinking, you know, we need to be more diverse, but also, you know, they're thinking of diversity in maybe a narrow way that they've experienced or they understand it. I think even in my experience with materials, class also comes into play. So there's a lot of standards and conversations and activities that really think about the student operating at a middle class level. And it really doesn't always jive with their experiences, right? They may be working class, they may be lower class, they may also be upper class, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of diversity in terms of the economic class and the conversations that are happening in the materials, right? They're all assuming everyone has either certain issues or not, or vice versa. They may also be assuming everyone is, you know, coming from a low, poor class level and they don't have access to resources. So you can see sometimes when the materials are designed that there was sort of this narrow view of who's going to be using these materials, and what going to the doctor looks like, what going to school looks like for someone. How about any ideas about policies? I know, like, we don't have a lot of control over these things all the time, but have you ever experienced a policy, maybe from state ed or from, you know, government in your town or city, where you said, this just kind of doesn't make any sense, or this is really going to affect a narrow group of people, or it's going to be a challenge for these other people, and it doesn't seem to connect with everyone or represent everyone? No examples? Wow, great, guys. We live in a awesome community in this room. I know, I mean, I think we probably have seen it where, you know, there might be a standard that, you know, everyone needs to participate at a certain time. And it may not be, you know, something that works for the student population at large if they're adults, right? A lot of our policies can be based on K through 12, you know, or a lot of things I know in our own division, right? We have IT regulations of the websites we can use and we can't use and on our site. And yet that's very limited to the K through 12 that they serve, but they don't really make any room for adult ed. We have to really do that sort of advocacy for ourselves, because when they think of regulations, they're not thinking of adult ed programming and K through 12, right? And that can just be based on their experience of who they're trying to serve in their mind at large. But sometimes that becomes an issue for us. We say, hey, we're part of the team too. You know, we need access to some of these things.
And Lauren, I don't think it's so much that these things don't exist. I think it's hard to come up with examples of them. But you did mention time schedules. I mean, a lot of times our time schedules, when we're allowed as an organization to do things, are bound by things like teacher contracts. You know, are bound by availability of buildings, you know, for programs that work in schools. Are you able to use that on a weekend?
Yeah.
You need to be able to function at a certain level to participate. You know, otherwise there are not enough students to make offering that particular program viable.
Yeah.
So we run into these things all the time. I think it's just hard to put words to them right here, right now. For people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I know it's hard on the spot, but you know, we can think of some other smaller examples. I do have some on the screen here. So I don't know, you know, if students are affiliated with a particular identity group, they may be treated as experts on that group issue. That's another way of thinking about something. So we might say, oh, well, based on your name, you must be a Spanish speaker. So I'm going to ask you all the questions about, you know, Latina culture and, you know, what does this mean? And you're an expert on it. And you might be one of those Latinos who's like, I didn't grow up learning Spanish. I don't know. I can't speak to this. And yet, because you have that look or that name, or maybe you speak with an accent, you know, all of a sudden, everyone in the room who is not is looking at you to be sort of this authority on that expert. And that's an implicit bias, right? That's something that is coming through. It's like, well, just because I, you know, look like this or have this name doesn't mean I have all of this information. Another example can be students with substandard writing abilities may be stereotyped as lacking intellectual ability. So sometimes, you know, again, we run into, I work in ESL, so we run into people, you know, that their writing is not great when they're doing a job application, and yet they may be brilliant. They could be doctors in their own country and language, but yet when they're filling out a job application, it may be seen as like, well, they didn't spell that right, so they don't have that intellectual ability to do this work, right? So that's another way that implicit bias can affect us in our communities. And instructors might treat a student with physical disabilities as if they also have mental disabilities and require more attention, right? So again, that implicit bias, you know, you see someone who maybe has a broken leg and they're in class and they're on crutches, and you may start to pay more attention to that person just inadvertently thinking they need this extra help somehow, when really that may not be the case. All right, so how do we build awareness? So I know Yasmin had a couple of suggestions, you know, but let's talk about it. And I did put a joke on there for anyone who watches The Office. I hope you get it. How do we build awareness? Not sure, just became self-aware. I love Dwight Schrute, and I love that joke that Jim played on him. So how can we do it? Well, one, we can self-assess implicit bias, right? We can sort of take that moment, Barry, right, when we're in that conflict and say, hey, what am I coming to the table with? Right? What's on me? We can also cultivate inclusivity, right? So just like Yasmin said, when you're thinking about mentoring somebody, think about mentoring somebody who's different than you, right? Make sure that we're bringing all voices to the table, and not just man or woman or black or white, but let's talk about, you know, upper class, lower class, working class. Let's talk about disabilities. Let's talk about gay and straight. Let's talk about blended families and, you know, single people. Let's, you know, try and build that inclusivity into the conversations we're having and into our materials and things we're doing. Solicit feedback from outside observers. How do you think we might be able to do that maybe in our classrooms or in our programs? Nothing? Well, one way could be doing surveys at the end of a class. Hey, what did you think about this lesson? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Something simple like that can just help you get a little awareness of like, is this reaching students? Am I connecting with them? Is this happening? Short surveys from your peers, right? At the end of the school year, you might say, hey, teachers, you know, what worked, what didn't work? You know, let's talk about these topics and sort of get that feedback from people who are on the outside, and that can help you build your lesson plans or your, you know, program planning. Soliciting student feedback, like we said, it could be a simple survey, it could be conversations. Any other ideas about how to build awareness for yourself? All right. Well, if anyone is interested, there is an implicit bias test that you can take. If you have your phone, you can scan the QR code. It was put out by Harvard or Yale, I believe. And it's just a way of learning what are some of your initial thoughts and bias when you see certain images or hear certain things. And it's a really fun way to sort of examine, hey, what am I bringing to the table? What am I coming to the table with? And this could be a great way to start that implicit bias awareness. All right, our classroom climate. So I have some suggestions on here on how to create or cultivate inclusivity. Do you guys have any experiences about how you might do this in your classroom or thoughts? Hello.
I think it's important to help students feel secure, like feel like the classroom is a safe space, and allow them to make mistakes in the class, because you know we learn from mistakes. So having them understand that it's a safe place for them to make mistakes, I think it helps.
Yeah, definitely. Letting them know it's a safe space. And we can do that by, you know, using inclusive language, you know, making sure we're representing a variety of people when we're speaking. So not just saying he, right? We can say he, she, they. Any other ideas?
What I'm trying to do a lot is do a lot of cooperative learning and group games, even because I'm finding that my students sometimes also even sometimes are not inclusive of each other. And so anything that's team building, and then, you know, partnering up folks who might not normally want to be partnered together, and then they find that they have a lot in common, and they're laughing by the end of whatever game it is or whatever. So just trying to create opportunities for everybody to work together.
Definitely. And that's a great point, Samantha, is not to forget that our students are also coming to the table with their own implicit bias, right? So they are coming with their own view and their own lenses, and they say like, oh, well, I can't sit at a table with them. They're not like me, or I'm not comfortable because of this. And yet, you know, maybe we can find ways with activities to bridge those gaps and help them see things sort of outside the box and be a little more inclusive, right? And also, I think it's important to call out anything that might be offensive. Right. So we're a little bit shy of that in our culture. American culture is very polite. We like to beat around the bush. But if we see something, we should say, hey, you know, that's just not how we talk to everybody in class, or that's not the way we describe that, or, you know, we might want to rethink how we're using that language. And I think it's okay to do that. It helps build awareness for ourselves, our students, our, you know, and our staff as well. There may be staff members who are unaware that they're saying something offensive. And it's okay to say, hey, that might not be the best way to do that. So that's a good way to sort of bring in some inclusivity into the classroom climate.
Lauren, when I was in the classroom, I felt it was really important to remember that our learners come into the classroom with their own learning experiences, with their own
Yes.
life experiences that they can contribute to that learning environment. So finding opportunities for students to share what they're comfortable with others and how it contributes to that learning experience was really important, because we're not always the sage on the stage. Well, we certainly have information to deliver. They're bringing in, very rich experiences that contribute to our learning experience.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I've done in our class, teach the teacher, right? Where I'm not the expert, you're the expert. And it doesn't have to be, anything large. It can be something smaller, a recipe, or, how to type, whatever the skill is, whatever the something is that you want to teach. It could be a cultural item. And that's a great strategy to let students know, like, hey, we're interested in your perspective. We want to make sure your voice is being heard. We also want to make sure we're doing lessons that are meaningful to you, right? That are engaging you, that you feel, part of. So definitely incorporating diverse perspectives. I think that's a great way to do that. And providing support, like Giovanni said. Go ahead, Samantha.
I think also just as an ENL teacher, I think sometimes students come into the classroom feeling like somehow English is better than their language, right? And we know that it's empowering and it's a tool, but so what I try to do a lot is if there's a challenging word and I say, and what is that word in Chinese? And what is that word in Pashto? And then I have other students repeat that word in a different language so that it's kind of honoring everyone's language. And I'll say, oh, that's beautiful, or what, I don't know, just trying to kind of take it not where English is here and everything else is here. It's like, no, it's a language that you want to learn right now, and it's going to be a good empowering tool for you, but your language is just as beautiful and just as important.
Yeah, and it's also good to think about, why do they think that? Why do they think that English is the best language? What messaging is out there that they're hearing and they're internalizing? Because we assume, also I've made that assumption of like, oh, well, I think my language is great. I think my experience is great. Well, it might be that I'm part of the dominant culture, but just because somebody speaks Spanish, they may not walk around thinking Spanish is great. They may walk around thinking, yeah, it's a lesser language. And why might they have that messaging? What are they encountering? And maybe we can do lessons about that. I think you shouldn't shy away from that opportunity either. It's like, yeah, well, why do we think that? Is it because of something we've seen, we've experienced? Is it the ads on TV, the billboards, the celebrities we see? What's that messaging around the world that people are receiving? And those are great conversations to have in class that will build that sort of inclusivity and that awareness of like, yeah, why do I think that?
I think also, even I don't know if other folks have had this experience too, but I've had some students even change their name. Like they'll introduce themselves with what they perceive as like an English American name, right? And I'll say, oh, but your name, I thought your name was this, and they'll say, oh, but it's easier to pronounce. To use it. And I always say, no, I want your name. I want to say your name, teach me, right? Do you know what I mean? Like even things like that. And it just makes me so sad that they even are changing their name.
Yeah, it's a lot of internalized racism, right? People are getting that messaging, just like, and if you happen to be part of the dominant culture, well, then it works for you and you're not really seeing it, right? If your name is, John Smith, life is pretty easy for you in terms of your name, right? Everybody can say it, acknowledge it in America, in English, it carries with it gender connotations, right? There's all these sort of implicit bias just with even a name. And so they might be changing their name because they've had difficulty using their actual name and they are maybe tired of it. Maybe they have decided, hey, I see the loophole and I need to go through it because it's not working for me this other way. I'm going to do it this way. So it's great to have those conversations. Like, why do you feel that way? You know, what's the thought behind that? Because maybe they're like, listen, it's great that you like my name, but every time I put it on a job application, I don't get a phone call. So I'm going to just go by this name. And this name is just, you know, a lot easier to handle in the American culture that I'm swimming in right now. So these are the great things to bring up and talk about. Yeah. So just incorporating, you know, diversity into the curriculum. Bertha talked about that a lot with materials, making sure we're showing a variety of experiences. So videos that we're showing, music that we're exposing them to, you know, food that we're talking about, just making sure that we're sort of hitting all levels and that people are represented. I mean, even things like, you know, two women being mothers in a family. A lot of our materials show a mom and a dad, right? So we want to think about inclusivity in ways other than just race and class, but bringing in sexuality and gender and all those other sort of tiers that are built in there. And it just sort of brings awareness. There's a thing called universal design principles. You can take a look at that. I don't want to get too into it because we're kind of out of time here. So moving on. And then maintaining awareness of classroom diversity. So it's good to have maybe some posters or maybe come up with a set of class rules. It would be a great exercise in class to say, hey, you know, we want to make sure everybody's feeling included and inclusive. How can we talk about diversity in class? What are some rules we might be able to have in our classroom to make this open, to make this a concept we're all thinking about? All right, so anybody want to share an idea of how they might bring implicit bias awareness into their classroom or their workplace or life outside of work? Did anybody get some sort of like, ooh, moments like, I should do that, I should think about that? No?
What I would say, Lauren, is that it's something that you have to work at constantly, right? Because
Right.
I think it's too easy to introduce it at one point. I mean, you have to reinforce it over and over and over again.
Yes.
Because
Right.
you fall back on what your comfort zone is.
Absolutely. And part of that is being aware, like, whoa,
Yep.
I'm doing
Right.
it again. Or,
Yep.
oh, when I created that schedule today, or that agenda or that lesson, who was I really thinking about, right? Who was my audience, right? Was it more in line with me, or was it more in line with my students or my, you know, whoever I'm serving? And it's a practice. It's a practice.
I would say, well, one of the expectations here in the classroom is respect students' opinions and cultures, and so just bringing that awareness to student that their religion is not the only religion, their culture is not the only culture, right? So looking at diversity from different angles too. And make it a safe place, right? Make it a safe place. There was one day students were talking to each other, and then they said, "Oh, who is your God?" "Oh, my God is Jesus." "Who is your God?" "Oh, my God is Buddha." And then the student said, "Oh, Buddha." And so then I reminded the students, well, remember that there is a lot of diversity. There is many religions, and one of those things, it's one of those things that we need to approach and teach students that we need to respect each other, respect each other's cultures, because sometimes students come from a culture that is one culture or in one religion into a country that there are many points of views. It's a big country. It's a big country, and so it's that element of understanding where they live and who they live with and who they live around with.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Joe. You know, it's for everyone. So I think the great thing about talking about this, and I hope the thing you take away, is that everyone is experiencing this. It's happening to all of us all the time. We are always, in this phase of filtering information. And it doesn't mean you have to every minute of every day think about it, but it is good that when you are in a position of power, as we are as educators, right, as we are as administrators or as leaders in our field, you know, we should definitely be thinking when we're creating, you know, lessons and affecting people and policies, and, you know, am I thinking of all these perspectives? Am I choosing inclusivity? Whose agenda am I putting forward? Am I assuming everyone, you know, has access to something or has experienced something when I present this information? So it's just a good way for us to check ourselves, I think, particularly as educators, but also as people in our community. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it was thoughtful. You got some good takeaways. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I know lunch is here, so we'll be seeing you guys soon. And if there's any questions, feel free to email me or contact me. I would be happy to explore this more with you.
Great job, Lauren. I do have a quick question. What platform did you use to make that killer presentation?
Canva, which
Thank
there
you.
is a presentation later this afternoon, Canva for Educators, which I would
Fantastic.
highly recommend
Yes,
you check
yes.
out. You know,
Thank
I love
you.
Canva, Geo.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And I want to just remind everyone to please fill out your session survey. It should be popping up at some point. And again, wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bertha. Bye,
Thanks,
guys. Have a great
Lauren.
lunch. See you in
Bye,
another
everyone.
session.
Thank you.
Awesome.